Hello, I'm Axel Abels, and I'm going to talk about this novel approach we developed to handle changes in expertise in collective decision making. So I'll go over the what and the why of collective decision making with non-stationary experts, so what our problem entails and what we're trying to achieve. Then I'll go over this novel algorithm we proposed, and finally we'll look at some applications and results. So first, the what. Now, this is our basic setup. So we're given a set of options we can choose from. It doesn't really matter what they represent exactly, as we're going for something generic. Let's say we'd like to treat a patient. You can then think of the options as possible treatments. So our goal here is going to be choosing the option with the best possible outcome. So for example, we observe a patient, their symptoms and their medical records, and we choose one of the treatments. Second one here, for example. So what happens then? Well, we observe the outcome or reward of the option we chose, for example, whether the treatment was successful, but we get no additional information about the utility of other options. So we don't know what the outcome of the other treatments would have been. In terms of notation, we usually denote the context of the problem, so the medical records and so forth, by x. And the outcome is then approximately fk of x, where k denotes the option we chose. So here we would observe f2 of x. And then we also observe some, but hopefully not too large, noise. To not crowd the notation too much, I'll drop this x term here, but just keep in mind that the outcome is a function of whatever context we observe. So now, equipped with our new knowledge about what the option's outcome can be, we can then update how we make decisions. So we have this learning loop that repeats a certain number of times, and our goal is to choose the options which maximize the outcome. What's nice about this bandit problem is that it's relatively simple, but it captures this fundamental trade-off between exploration and exploitation. So do we choose one of the unknown options to gain more knowledge, or do we simply stick with what we think is best so far? Unfortunately, the amount of exploration you sometimes need is not practical. So in our medical scenario, you can imagine that it's a bad idea to let a machine learning model learn from scratch when we could actually use some existing expertise. And this is where the collective decision making comes in. So instead of learning what's good from scratch, we're going to try to use the available expertise to more rapidly make good decisions. So instead of having a learner in isolation, we're now going to have a group of experts which tell a centralized decision maker what it should do. Our aim is still to figure out what the best option is, but now we have some expertise to base our decisions on. These experts could be either humans or some statistical model. Anyway, the point is that we'd like to listen to what they're telling us and figure out over time which one of these experts are actually telling us something useful. Now, to complicate matters a bit more, we'll also take into account that the experts might change over time. So whether this is a result of new experience or data, or maybe an expert is compromised somehow, we'd like our system to be robust to changes in expertise. So ultimately, our goal, beyond simply making good decisions, is to achieve collective intelligence. By this, we simply mean that the decisions made by this centralized learner should be better than the decisions made by any single expert in a group. So can we combine the knowledge of the group in such a manner, taking into account this whole bandit setting where we only observe partial stochastic outcomes? So the way we're actually going to combine the advice is the crucial part if you want to achieve this collective intelligence, but this hasn't really been the focus of previous approaches in this setting. So previous approaches such as XP4S were focused on selecting the single best expert in the collective. In contrast, we are trying to find the best aggregate. So in the usual case wherein the best aggregate is better than the best individual, we should be able to attain collective intelligence. There's another more subtle advantage, which is that the aggregate tends to drift more slowly than individual experts. This means that it could be easier actually to track the single best aggregate over time. So now, how do we actually track this aggregate? So a bit more formally, we can see each expert N as being an approximation of the truth. So when the experts advise the centralized learner, they're telling them what they expect the outcome of each option will be. each element in this vector corresponds to what this expert expects the outcome of each option to be. So using the treatment example, so the medical treatments, we would ask a medical expert to tell us how likely it is that each treatment would result in recovery. And this is what these values in these vectors would be. So remember that we're dealing with experts that might change over time, so this is why we have this T superscript in this notation. So how do we actually use these estimates? So what we propose is to assume that a true outcome can be approximated by a linear combination of the estimates given by the experts. So we would look at each expert's advice and, for example, take the first element from each expert. This gives us the estimates for the first arm, which we transform into an estimated outcome using a dot product with our learned weights theta. So obviously this model is not very complex, but it is nice because it remains interpretable. We can look at the weights and have a good understanding of which experts most influence the decisions, how this evolves over time, and specifically which decisions and outcomes had a larger impact on the model. Another advantage is that this model can actually achieve collective intelligence. So we can show that under certain weak assumptions, this linear combination will be better than any single expert in the collective. Now, some questions remain. The most important one is how do we optimize this theta given the bandit setting, which gives us only partial and noisy outcomes. Specifically, because we only observe the outcomes of our decisions, we have to be careful that we don't converge too quickly on a certain combination of expertise. So it becomes crucial that we do some exploring. Since we're also dealing with changing experts, we want to make sure our model also adapts along with the experts. So this means that recent experiences should have a higher impact on theta than older experiences. So to achieve the latter, we're going to perform weighted linear regression and weigh recent experiences more highly. And for the former, the need for exploration, we're going to use the optimism in the face of uncertainty principle. So in short, this means that if we have some uncertainty about the outcomes, we're going to assume that the world is as nice as possible by using this uncertainty as a bonus. So we can compute the estimated outcome for each option as a linear combination of advice. We can also compute an expected variance for each option's estimate. And what we'll do is select the option that maximizes a weighted sum of these two terms. So this ensures that we have an appropriate balance of exploitation and exploration. We then observe the outcome of the option we chose, this RT, which we can then use to update the empirically optimal weights. So in this formula, we have this gamma parameter, which essentially discounts older experiences more, so it controls how adaptive the algorithm is. I didn't include it here to not further crowd the formulas, but you would typically include some kind of regularization too, which can be especially useful if you have redundant experts. And if we do all of this, we can theoretically show that if the expertise doesn't change too rapidly, we can converge towards the best aggregate, which means that we can usually obtain collective intelligence. Okay, so now I'd like to show some experimental results to illustrate the benefits of this approach. So we simulated a synthetic decision-making setting and compared 3 algorithms. So 2 previous approaches are DTS and XP4S, and then we're also looking at the best expert. And we're comparing all of this to our DMETA-CMAB algorithm. The results here are averaged, but our simulation will run on varying number of arms and varying levels of non-stationarity. So what we have on this x-axis is the number of experts in our collective. So looking at the average reward, we find that our algorithm outperforms the others. So we are actually able to outperform the best expert. We also observe an effect which might be familiar, which is that as we increase the number of experts, we further improve upon the best expert, but with diminishing returns. So this is similar to Condorcet's jury theorem, which you might be familiar with. So these results are nice, but as I said, we're using a synthetic problem. So let's look at a practical application. Now, one of the applications of this algorithm is active learning. So in short, active learning starts from an unlabeled set of data, and because obtaining labels can be expensive, in active learning we try to select which data points should be labeled by an oracle. So the problem is that there are a lot of strategies to make this selection, and it's not always clear in advance which strategy is most appropriate. In addition, the usefulness of strategies can change over time. For example, it's often good at the beginning to label a diverse set of points and then later focus on the points for which we are most uncertain. So there's clearly a non-stationary aspect to this. So what can we do? Well, since we have these strategies telling us which points we should label, we can treat the strategies as experts and the points as options or decisions we can make. So we're essentially reducing this problem to one of decision making with expert advice. So we tried this out using a linear SVM classifier on about 30 different data sets. For our expert sets, we considered 5 different query strategies, which are some of the more common ones. Then we ran the active learning loop for 100 iterations and then measured balance accuracy on a test set. So we plot here the performance in function of adaptiveness, which is a parameter that controls how rapidly these algorithms adapt. So if you remember from our weighted linear regression, this was this gamma parameter that that discounted all their experiences. So in the end, we find that our algorithm outperforms previous algorithms for varying levels of adaptiveness. So what this means concretely is that by controlling the querying strategy through d-meta-cmab, we are able to select data points which in the end result in improved accuracy. So to sum up the main takeaways from these results, first, we found that the aggregates we consider here are able to deliver collective intelligence, in the sense that they can outperform the single best expert. Now, the non-stationary setting does complicate things a bit, as we have to ensure that aggregates are adapting, but our proposed d-meta-cmab is able to adapt, and as a result, it converges towards aggregates that surpass the best changing experts. Now, just before I finish, I'll add a sort of addendum. So I'd like to say something about the caveats of these results. So while we do have theoretical results, the empirical results involve synthetic experts. So it's not obvious actually whether the assumptions we make would also hold for human expertise. And unfortunately, there's a limited amount of appropriate data involving humans which we could use to test this. So this is one of the reasons we're running some experiments online where we ask humans to essentially provide advice which we can then use in a collective decision-making task. So we're still collecting more data, so if you're interested, feel free to check out bias.ulb.be, where we ask humans to answer some questions involving possibly sensitive features which might introduce some bias, and we also try to detect this. So I think it's quite interesting, so if you have some time, feel free to check it out. But anyway, the results we have collected through this platform suggest that our algorithm indeed also work with human experiments. So we're still collecting more data, but like early results are suggesting that it also works. And that completes my presentation. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.